Welcome to the McNay Art Museum and also our Tobin Distinguished Lecture Series featuring the fine woman standing to my left, your right, Anna Louizos. If you didn't know earlier, when you crossed onto our campus, our 23 acres tonight, you just entered the first modern art museum in all of Texas. And another woman got us there, and that was Mrs. McNay, who moved here in the 1920s. And she stayed, thankfully for us, for her third, fourth, and fifth marriages, and decided we can bypass the first two, but what was important for us is that on her third, she decided to make San Antonio her home and the destination, a global destination for modern and contemporary art. And before passing away in 1950, she had a vision that these 23 acres, that Spanish colonial home that she and her third husband built together, and the 700 masterpieces that they and subsequent husbands and her collected together would eventually be the core of that first modern art museum in the entire state of Texas. She was, in fact, a visionary, and tonight we're all about visionaries, not only Anna, but the individuals I'm about to mention. Tonight we welcome our newest member of the family, who I will introduce shortly, but we will be introducing Dr. Scott Blackshire, our curator of the Tobin Collection of Theater Arts, who's here to introduce Anna and close the program. But before I invite Scott to my right, your left, up to the podium, I wanted to recognize those mighty, and I mean mighty, individuals who got us here tonight. And when I say here, I mean a global destination for the very best of the theater arts. In fact, for 2 decades, the Tobin Distinguished Lecture Series has been sponsored every year by the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund. And this series celebrates people like Anna, pioneers in theater arts who are committed to bringing their many gifts, and as you'll see in a few minutes, there are many, to our diverse audiences, meaning everyone in San Antonio. And former speakers of this series, this very distinguished lecture series, include Ming-Cho Lee and Paul Tazwell, Susan Hilferty, and more recently, Francesca Zambello. And this series is named, I mentioned visionaries, by a great visionary from our own community here in San Antonio. It's named after Robert L.B. Tobin, who recognized very early on the great value and the countless contributions of theater arts professionals to staged productions. Robert, in fact, appreciated theater designs depicting the art of stage craft. And he saw what we already all know. He saw that theater arts were very much on a par with the fine arts. And we know that very well here at the McNay because we're the proud home of the Tobin Collection of Theater Arts. And if you don't know this collection, Scott's about to enlighten all of us in the coming years, but it's a collection that in the last 20 years alone has grown to 12,000 objects. And this collection includes a treasure trove of rare books featuring Robert's great passion for festival books, as well as priceless documents that trace the development of the theater arts over 4 centuries. Robert Tobin's legacy continues. It not only continues in San Antonio, but it in fact thrives here in San Antonio thanks to 3 individuals, the 3 trustees of the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund. We're very blessed to have 2 of the 3 trustees with us here tonight. It's always a great honor to recognize the first of those 3, the chair, president, and trustee of the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund, Mel Weingart. Mel, thanks for joining us. It's also a great honor to welcome a second trustee, internationally renowned and award-winning set and costume designer, Bob Pertziola. Bob, welcome. Like Anna, Bob arrived just today to be with us here tonight. Thank you for joining us. The third and last of the 3 trustees who's not with us here, but always with us in spirit, is Linda Hardberger. So if you know Linda, she was the former First Lady of our city. She was also the first, very important first for us here at the McNay family because she was our very first curator of the Tobin Collection of Theater Arts, the position that Scott holds today. And she took that position before Scott and I were born. That's not true. She took that position, and please don't share that. We can cut the video at this point. She took that position in 1984, and it's a position that she very proudly held, working with Robert for 16 years. Together, these trustees, these really remarkable trustees of the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund, have taken Robert's vision and his impact beyond San Antonio, beyond Texas, and around the world. And they've established great awards in his honor, including a biennial, the Robert L.B. Tobin Director-Designer Showcase Award through Opera America. And they also have established the annual Robert L.B. Tobin Award for Sustained Excellence in Theatrical Design at the Theater Defense Fund's Irene Sheriff Awards, which are about to be announced next month in New York City, this year, very fittingly, on Robert's birthday. But tonight, Robert's legacy shines very brightly in his hometown of San Antonio, and Anna is the source of that bright light. Tonight, we welcome Anna to the stage, and to do so properly, I wanted to leave you in incredibly gifted hands with Scott Blackshire, our newest member of the family, the new curator of the Tobin Collection of Theater Arts. Scott Holds very recently completed his PhD in performance studies at the University of Texas at Austin, that other city of the North. His career spans performing and fine arts, nonprofit management, as well as higher education. And in very little time, in fact, in record time, he has already embraced and brought in full embrace to the McNay an appreciation for artistic excellence and community impact. And he's brought that to the world's great collection of theater arts, as well as that first modern art museum in Texas. So please join me in welcoming a truly gifted individual worthy of the collection he now represents, Scott Blackshire.
So thank you, Rich, for your welcome and for your recognition of the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund leadership. Mel Weingart, Linda Hardberger, and Bob Hertziola. This evening, we welcome scenic designer Anna Louizos, the 2019 Tobin Distinguished Lecturer. We celebrate communities of theater artists around the world, and we honor the legacy of Robert Tobin thanks to the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund. In my first 3 months at the McNay, Rich has been very clear that I have grown quite fond of Robert Tobin. I've been reading and researching a lot about him. I've been rooting around the archives for little treasures about him, and I've been listening to the many Robert Tobin stories that some of the docents have shared with me. However, my favorite research falls under the category of monthly lunches with Mel. I always learn something new about Robert, and being an artist in his own right, Mel and I speak a very similar language, and I always leave Mel's company feeling grateful for the opportunity to hear firsthand about the world Robert created for himself through his art. Without a doubt, Robert Tobin lived a fascinating life, and the extent to which Robert Tobin shared this fascinating life with others is apparent. He shared his life without hesitation. He shared his life through his passion for the theater arts. He shared his life through a generous commitment to community, and he shared his life surrounded by artists like Anna Louizos, who bring often unimaginable worlds to the stage. Tonight, we welcome Anna Louizos into the fold of artists who each year add to Robert Tobin's legacy. As a scenic designer, Anna is tasked with the question, how to fit a vast, unknown world, more often than not, within the confines of a small theater space. She drafts designs with broad creativity and focused artistry in order to answer and in service to the stories being told. Anna's body of work represents the ways in which creativity and artistry meld with multiple ideas and go through multiple revision after revision after revision, as we talked earlier today, ultimately to define and refine the details of that world on a stage. In 1990, theater scholar Eleanor Fuchs, now professor emerita at Yale University, wrote an essay titled Visit to a Small Planet, Some Questions to Ask a Play. And all of you people, young people here, should read that. It's still an amazing piece. And if you contact me, I'll get it to you. But in this essay, Eleanor Fuchs poses questions about the concepts of performance place, where the action is happening. Answers to these questions reveal a stage world's physical makeup, social order, and other characteristics. And that's what Anna Louizos does. Anna Louizos answers Fuchs' questions, and with those answers gives audiences entree into worlds they might not find surprising or not immediately understand. For digging deep into a production to find the answers to hard questions that bring to life a new theatrical world, Anna has received critical acclaim and Tony nominations, most notably for In the Heights, as well as High Fidelity and The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Her scenic design work spans Broadway, off-Broadway, and regional theater, and her art direction has been seen on TV and in film. And we are very proud to have her set model for In the Heights, the Broadway production, on display now up in the Tobin Gallery through June 30th as part of our America on Stage exhibition. So we invite you all to come back and see that. Tonight, Anna shares with us how she brings new worlds to the stage, imagining endless places in limitless spaces. Sorry, limited spaces. That's a different speech. Please join me in welcoming Anna Louizos. I totally changed it up for you.
There you go. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank the board of the Tobin Theatre Arts Fund for this invitation to San Antonio and for this special opportunity to be a guest speaker. I've known of the Tobin collection for many years, and I'm thrilled to actually finally get to see it. It's been, today was a very special hour or so I spent before coming into this room, and just seeing the body of work of so many people whose work I've admired over the years, and people that I actually know. It's kind of mind-blowing to look at something in a museum and go, oh my God, I know that person, you know. So I guess all these years of work have paid off. I'm especially thrilled that the Tobin collection has included my set for In the Heights, the model for it's the tour set, by the way, but it looks just like the Broadway set. And it makes me very happy to know that it has a permanent home. On the many occasions when I've been asked to speak about my work and my career, I'm always faced with the dilemma of summing up so many things. How did you become a set designer? What was your career path? What is your process? How do you realize your vision? What steps do you take? And what's your favorite set design? So I did get asked these questions today, it seems, and I always get asked these questions, and it's hard to just sum it up. But I think I decided to give my talk a theme: endless places, limited spaces, because I think that really sums up the dilemma and the challenge and the joy of what a set designer has to do. First, I'll give you a little background about me and where I came from. I grew up in a small town in Northern California. I was drawn to theater and performing from a very young age. We made several family trips to Europe and Greece because my father was from Greece, and both my mother's parents were also from Greece. So we had a lot of connections there, and I got to see a lot of the world outside of my small town at a young age, and I was exposed to other languages and other cultures. My dad was a high school teacher, and he had an artistic and inventor's eye. So I spent many hours with him on constructing projects, restoring Volkswagen engines, and learning to be inquisitive about how things are built and how they work. I was also drawn to music, and I learned music when I was young, and I used to perform and sing, and so I just thought, well, theater was a natural segue for me. I just loved performing and being a part of theater and being a part of other worlds. And so I went to college. I first went to Mills College in Oakland, California. It's a small liberal arts women's college. And then after 2 years, I transferred to NYU in the undergrad's Tisch School of the Arts program, the theater program. And I had it gave me a chance to live this dream of being in New York, because I always felt like I wanted to be in New York. So, but throughout my studies in performing, I always was drawn to the other aspects of production design and scenery especially. And since childhood, I had always enjoyed drawing and painting. So, but I just considered it a hobby. And it wasn't until I came to New York and I saw that set design was an actual profession, that people actually did this for a living, that I thought, well, maybe that's where I really want to go. Because when you're an aspiring actor in New York City, you're a very tiny fish in a very big pond. And it became very clear to me that it just wasn't in my gut. I didn't have to do acting. There were so many other things I was interested in. So I decided to pursue set design. Now, it's one thing to set your sights on becoming a set designer, and it's another thing to actually become one. Nobody gives you an instruction book on how to become a set designer. For me, it was a rather slow and deliberate, sometimes circuitous path. It often took me in different directions, much of it due to economic reasons, because it's hard to make a living doing that. But there were times when I actually wondered if I'd lost my way, and maybe I should change my mind and do something else. So I kept trying, and the first 10 years I spent trying to figure out how to get work. I worked as an assistant for a number of set designers, several of whom are in that museum. And I actually learned much about the business of theater along the way as I assisted. And it wasn't steady income, so I spent many years supporting my theater habit by working in the restaurant business. First as a waitress, and then as a general manager. And in retrospect, I realized that the years of managing people and running a business would be very, very helpful for me later in my career. So to illustrate my theme of endless places, limited spaces, I agonize about which examples of my set designs to present you. It's always hard for me to choose because I have great affection for each design for a variety of reasons, and every show is unique. So generally, I start the process of designing a show by asking 3 key questions. Where, why, and how. Where? What is the world that must exist to support this story? Having conversations with the director is really the launching point for exploring the style and the aesthetic vision and the feel of the piece. Why? Why choose to tell the story in this particular way? So one key to designing for live theater is obviously embracing the limitations of the stage. Unlike TV or film, everything that takes place on stage must happen consistently in real time. There are no retakes. There's no editing. Once the show starts, it is a running train. So it's a unique challenge because, the storytelling depends on a concisely crafted and choreographed interplay between technology, artistry, and human effort. How? Well, how to execute your vision? Well, we do this by finding creative ways to use the theatrical tricks of the trade that tell the story using technology that is available, such as automation, flying things, tracking things, revolving scenery. Creating illusion is another way. Using two-dimensional imagery in limited space, forced perspective, as you saw in the model for In the Heights, just to create the sense of depth. And sometimes projections are used, LED screens, even holograms these days. Special effects, fog, smoke, all of those things that you use as devices to help tell your story. And other decisions we also have to make, like how the scenery moves, how do you transition from one scene to another? All of these decisions are crucial in storytelling. In this case, technology and art must function in tandem. So I've brought along some examples of shows that illustrate the various ways I've chosen to deal with this challenge of showing many places in limited spaces. First example is Cinderella, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, by the way. This is the classic fairy tale originally made for television. The stage version had a new book by Douglas Carter Beane. It had a fresher take and a slightly more contemporary sensibility, but still it had all the romance and the lushness of the original story. So the first question of where began with an inspirational image from the director, Mark Brokaw. These are some of the many images that we collected. This forest full of chandeliers, with Taylor Swift in the picture. I think it's a perfume ad. There's something about this image that Mark just kept coming back to and just said, these speak to me about the show. There's something about these that speak to me. So the thing we noticed was that there was always this sense of nature throughout these images. So we were drawn towards having that organic presence of nature throughout the show. Why do it this way? Well, once we made the decision that nature was a part of the show, all the other choices that we made sprang from nature. Also, it was important to Mark, the director, that he did not want to have any blackouts between the scenes. He wanted the scenery to move in a smooth, seamless way. So the transitions had to be orchestrated in a very cinematic way. How to execute this world? Well, every piece of scenery was hand sculpted, crafted and painted and engineered. The house, the horses, the carriage, all having the appearance of being composed elements from nature. We built many models. We had many conversations about scenic transitions and scenic elements to work in a seamless way to move the story along. The trees all tracked on and off stage to create different relationships within the forest. The horse for the carriage. This was one of the horses that the prince rode, and these are the horses for the carriage. They were all completely hand sculpted, vacuum formed, reconstructed over a framework so that when the two animals turned into the coachman and the footman, he had bicycle pedals and he would pedal, and the legs of the horses would move as the carriage moved. These are the actual horses in the shop being built. All of the shapes that you see were sculpted, and then molds were created, and then liquid material would be poured into these molds, and then they would be pulled out and used as these natural organic shapes. This also became a tour. It toured the U.S., and there's another tour that's currently running. The arches, for example, that you see, they're separate sculpted half arches that can track and revolve to alter the dynamics of the space. This is how they operated on stage. They would track on stage, they could turn, and they could form these shapes. So we strive to create a unique and original world for Cinderella by combining organic elements and using automation to create a place where forests of trees could move across the stage, and pumpkins turned into golden carriages, and country bumpkins turned into princesses. Here's another example of another show. This was Avenue Q. This is the irreverent Sesame Street-inspired musical with puppets about post-college struggles and lessons of growing up. It also famously won the 2004 Tony Award for Best Musical. Where does the story take place? Well, it's supposed to take place in some neighborhood outside of Manhattan where puppets and people coexist. Why do it this way? Well, the show started in a small off-Broadway theater where we had both limited space and a limited budget. So, this is the model. So we dealt with the limitations, and we came up with this idea of an Advent calendar style framework, which allowed for more flexible use of the set. it was decided to accept the convention that the puppeteers would be seen as part of the puppet characters. So they weren't hidden like they are in the Sesame Street show. How? Well, after many discussions with the director, Jason Moore, we settled on a scale for the buildings that would work for both people and puppets. Everything is slightly smaller than normal if you look at these buildings. The doors and the windows, the second level. Like when people would show up in the second level, this was how we showed the interiors of the puppets' homes. We made decisions about where the characters would live, like what would represent their interiors in a very simple, whimsical style. And the windows doubled as dioramas. Various props would be rolled on in to play a variety of scenes in front of the buildings. When people would appear in the second floor of those windows, they're on their knees, basically. That's how low it is back there. So this was an example of a unit set. Nothing moves. The set is what you see. It's an example of a unit set that established this convention that what you see is not all that is there. The windows suggest other places. Simple props introduced different locations and interiors. Diminished proportions of the buildings made it possible to believe that puppets and people could coexist. And then the audience learns to accept those conventions, which became part of the charm of the piece. Here's another show. This one is in the Heights. This was the 2007 Tony Award-winning Best Musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda. A lively musical mix of salsa and hip-hop. Many people here are very familiar with the show and are in the process of doing it right now. It focuses on the daily lives of first-generation Latino Americans and immigrants struggling against the tide of gentrification. So where does the story take place? It's a New York neighborhood called Washington Heights, known for its dramatic views, sloping topography, 10-story buildings, vibrant street life, struggling businesses, and the looming presence of the George Washington Bridge. It's a real place. So for me, my challenge was depicting the essence of the neighborhood. That was the important part. This was a rough sketch just to kind of orient my version of the neighborhood. If you look down at the bottom of the page, there's Abuela in the corner, sitting on the stoop, and there's the car service and the deli and the salon. This was an early study that when I spoke with Tommy Kail about doing a show curtain for the show, one idea we had conceived was possibly doing kind of a primitive, urban, self-taught painted version of the neighborhood. There was a painter called Ralph Fasanella who was a self-taught urban painter. He painted a lot of New York scenes. Self-taught, I think he was a truck driver or something. But he painted beautiful depictions of New York that was like folk art, but they were so vibrant and lively that I got really excited about it. I even took Tommy to the Museum of the City of New York, and I said, "You got to see this." And we toyed with the idea, but then we ultimately decided we were going to abandon the idea because he wanted people to walk in and just see the set, so we didn't have a show curtain at all. But this is one of my early studies for that. So in this case, I had a very clear message why tell the story in this particular way with this unit set. The message from the producers to me was, we do not want any automation, we do not want moving buildings, we don't want any tracking, and there has to be room for dancing. So how do you execute a neighborhood, the design of a neighborhood? Well, you have to play with perspective. You have to create the illusion of depth, height, scale, a sense of distance and depth. So how do you populate the neighborhood? Well, if I used actual building proportions, I would fit maybe 2 buildings on the stage and only about 2 floors. I mentioned that today when I was talking to some people because of the proportion of a real building. So I used the illusion of height and perspective to suggest multi-storied pre-war buildings. that were characteristic of that neighborhood. Second and third story buildings were truncated and skewed, and I layered the buildings 3 deep using printed brick scrim on the face of the buildings so that you could see through them. Again, this was a unit set where actors moved the scenic pieces to establish interior scenes and other locations by simply just bringing out a piece of furniture, and like a counter or a chair or a table, just to suggest each location. And providing access to the second level and the fire escapes allowed scenes to take place upstairs, but still allowed sufficient room for that explosive and exciting dance that was very much a part of the show. So here's a very different kind of show that I was also lucky to do. This is White Christmas, which is obviously a popular, beloved American movie classic, famous for its Irving Berlin songs. And of course, this is a movie that everybody knows and is very familiar with. So where does the story take place? Well, it takes place in 1954, and like the movie, it takes place in multiple locations, from an army camp to the Ed Sullivan Show, to dressing rooms, a divey nightclub, a Vermont inn, a train, and porch, a swanky nightclub, and then there's the barn where they put on the show. And of course it has to snow at the end. So, why do you do it this way? How do you do it this way? Well, how do you top a beloved movie? We had to be sure to land those expected moments from the movie, but with added Irving Berlin music and material, the goal was to create a new live classic version of the show. It's also a classic show within a show where the characters are performing musical numbers as part of the story. So, with the limited stage space, I had to create all these varied places by using a combination of devices. I used wagons, which bring pieces on stage, track things on and off, combined with flying pieces to create stage pictures that are convincing. Also, by designing this irising portal, I was able to frame various scenes and allow for scenes to take place and be preset. An irising portal is basically you have scenic legs that track on and off stage like this, right? Sometimes they telescope because they need to fill the whole stage. So you might have 2 legs coming from one side and 2 legs coming from the other side, and then you have a border that flies in. So the effect is that, you're creating this irising effect. And with White Christmas, I did that a lot. So sometimes we would open up on one side of the stage and see the girls' dressing room, and then that would close, and then it would open and reveal the boys' dressing room, and then they would both open, and then you'd see them both having these conversations and this split scene. So during my conversation with Walter Bobby, who was the director, we decided we had to establish rules about how we use the scenery. And these are decisions that designers and directors have to make all the time. So we decided that the scenery would move a vista, and a vista means the audience is watching scenery change in your view. We would allow for scenery to move when they were putting on the show. So you'd say, bring in the drop, and you'd see the drop come in, or you'd move this and that. But when we were doing the book scenes, so they're in the inn and they're talking, we would iris open and reveal the scene, and then they would just be in their world and having their conversations. So those are the rules we decided to set for ourselves, and that's kind of how we guided our decisions as we went through the show and figured it all out. Of course, like I said, there's a barn the characters put on the show, and of course, at the climax of the show, the barn doors open and they swing open and there's snow. So this is achieved simply by creating the illusion of a barn. So what you saw was back here, that back wall is that. That's what the back wall of the barn, it's a flat piece of scenery. But you see all the perspective there? That's all flat. It's painted to look like it has, like it's coming towards you, but it's actually not. And those doors are on tracks. So the next layer that you see is the set of legs, which have the beams. That's a separate piece that's flown in front of that back wall, and that's about 6 feet downstage of that. And then you see the little ladder legs, that's another 6 feet downstage. And then in front of that is a portal, which basically frames the barn. And then upstage, through those doors, we had a painted translucent snowy drop. And in between the snowy drop and the barn doors was a cradle, a fabric cradle with slits in it, with paper snow. And the crew would move the snow, and it would just fall. And when those barn doors open, it is magical. People freak out when they see it, because it's just so effective. And yet everybody knows that we're watching something that's not real, but I think that's what's wonderful about theaters. We all get to play, we all get to pretend together. So, and then of course at the end, Walter said, oh wait, at the end we go outside. The curtain comes down at the end of this little moment, and then when the curtain opens up, we're outside. And so what you saw were people in little outfits, and they're pretending to skate, and the snow is falling. And then all of a sudden, over the audience, we have snow machines, and the snow is falling on the audience. So it's a wonderful show. And Carrie Robbins did the costumes, which are so perfect for 1954. This is another show I did called High Fidelity, which is another book-based story and then subsequent film with John Cusack. Well, this is a stage version which had an original score by Tom Kitt, who later wrote Next to Normal. He co-wrote this with Amanda Green, who wrote the lyrics. It's about a slacker record store owner who struggles to maintain a balance between his relationships and his obsession of love of rock and roll music. So where does the story take place? Various locations around New York, a used record store, Rob's apartment, his living room, his bedroom, a local bar, and a gym. So this was his record store that I created, and the dressing and the details on this was really a huge part of making it feel like a real, authentic record store. And I had the most fabulous prop person. And so much of what we do is so collaborative that my props person, I would say, you know, I need to get like a lot of records. She would go and get all these tons of records and stickers and funky pieces of furniture and things that we just incorporated into the set, which made a huge difference when you saw it. So the tricky part, okay, the thing about this story was that it centers around this guy, Rob, and like the movie, he speaks to the audience throughout the entire show. So we witness the unfolding story from his point of view throughout the entire show. So how do you do this? Well, the tricky part was he often speaks of his fantasies and thoughts as they become realized on stage. So I had to come up with ways to have seamless transitions and transformations so that we could witness the shift from one place to another as he's telling the story. So in this case, automation was very important. Here's an example. Well, this was his bedroom. Here's an example from a transition from his bedroom filled with his record collection when he's singing about, this is my record store, and then he says, well, this is my store. So he's talking to the audience, and he starts singing this song, that I'm the proud owner of the last real record store on earth. So the bed goes down the elevator, the walls track off, the towers spin, revealing things that you hadn't seen before, and the records come on. That's what automation can do. There are many moments like this in the show. One moment where he's lying on his sofa, which also came out of the floor and flipped out into place, and then the coffee table came out from under the sofa. He's lying, that's how they got the sofa to flip in and out. And behind the sofa was another elevator for another special moment where he's singing, you know, why can't I be like the boss? Why can't I be like you, Bruce Springsteen? Because he's listening to Bruce Springsteen music. So while he's singing, why can't I be like the boss, suddenly something happens. And the boss shows up and tells him, man, you gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps, man. And so, and another example where we use tricks that were built into the scenery. These two sliders that you see behind the characters have these little flipping vertical blinds to them. So Rob has split up with his girlfriend, and now she's taken up with someone else. This is the guy upstairs who she has taken up with. But then there's a scene later where we use one bed to depict the two separate bedrooms. Rob is on one side of the bed, while his ex-girlfriend is on the other side of the bed, each of them having slept with different people. And the way we achieved this was by flipping different parts of the wall to show the different bedrooms. And the blanket was also built to reveal different bedrooms. So she's singing, she just slept with someone, and then he's finished singing, I slept with someone. So we have, so then they after they finish their songs, their sleep mates show up. So this was a show where using automation was key in delivering the scenic elements to the stage in the swiftest possible way. Elevators through the stage floor with multiple axes of movement, tracking and revolving towers with built-in automated tricks, and flying elements, all of which combine to create these cinematic transitions. So this was my first Tony Award nomination, this show. So I was very proud of that. The Mystery of Edwin Drood is a very different kind of show. This is the 2013 revival of the 1986 Tony Award-winning musical that was produced at the Roundabout Theater's Studio 54. This was a stellar cast. I mean, you couldn't have found a better cast. It was Cheetah Rivera, Stephanie J. Block, Will Chase, Andy Carl, Jesse Mueller, Betsy Wolfe, and many other Broadway veterans. This Rupert Holmes creation centers around an English music hall troupe of performers who have taken up the task of dramatizing the last unfinished novel of Charles Dickens, and the audience is required to vote at the end of how the story ends. Where? Well, my job was to transform Studio 54 into an English music hall. So I needed to provide access to the audience because the performers interacted with the audience and evoke that period style with painted drops. Why do the show this way? Well, the piece calls for a presentational music hall style. So the chairman, who leads the acting troupe, he facilitates the performance and introduces the actors and characters in the play. So in order to realize this style of the piece, Scott Ellis, who's the director, and I wanted to pay tribute to the music hall style by creating painted drops. So inspired by those lavishly painted oleo drops from the 19th century and summoning up my painting skills from graduate school, I tried to evoke that style by painting the drops myself in quarter-inch scale or half-inch scale, and then having the scenic artists reproduce the drops by hand. It's such a thrill, I have to tell you, to see the incredible techniques that these scenic artists use to reproduce what begins as these little color elevations and become these full-scale drops. It takes tremendous discipline and skill to know when to use dyes versus paint, how to exploit the translucent aspects of the fabric in order to backlight the drops for all these wonderful effects. You know, seeing windows backlit. Like you see the windows, how they're lit. That's all because the drops are being backlit. And certain areas of the drops are opaque. They paint them out. They paint them opaque so that the light won't penetrate through. They have to be very strategic about that stuff. And so there were 13 painted drops in the show. And it was fun to go to the scene shop because the scenic artists were also very excited because they don't get to do this all the time. So it was an unapologetic tribute to old-fashioned scenic techniques where actual painted scenery was the featured element. This was the finale drop, so the center of this was cut out and there was a separate piece that had that Mystery of EDWIN DROOD on it, and then it could be backlit, but then it could fly out. So there was a shadow play at the end to talk about the murder, and then that center part flew out, and the character of EDWIN DROOD reappears at the end. So one more example I have is more recent, is School of Rock, based on a popular movie starring Jack Black. And everyone knows it's about a freeloader, another freeloader, who refuses to grow up and lives a fantasy of becoming a rock star. He poses as his roommate to get a job as a substitute teacher and eventually enlists his class of 10-year-olds to form a rock and roll band and compete in the Battle of the Bands. I also did the costumes for this show, by the way, which I don't usually do, but for this one I did. Where does the show take place? Well, it often with movie-based material, there's an expectation that the story needs to flow at a quick pace, so the scenery can't become an obstacle. So automation was essential, and the story bounced between Dewey's rock and roll-centric world and his crash pad and the elite prep school where he's posing as a teacher. I used a lot of automation to bring scenic elements combined with tracking elements, wagons, and flying scenery to locate each set, and things assembled in a variety of ways so that you were not hemmed in by delivering scenery in one particular way. Hallway sliders would track on, and then they would pivot to form the classrooms, and then the reverse side was used for other hallway scenes. There were brick sliders that came on that served for the more urban settings. And I like to reserve some surprises in the design so that the audience remains attentive and that they don't assume that they've seen everything. So for the last scene in the Battle of the Bands, I added an entirely new element, which was the concert stage for the end. Yeah, he was crazy. Brave, I should say. Alex Brightman, who was our first Dewey, is now starring in Beetlejuice, that's going to Broadway. He's a lot thinner now, too. So the finale was this rock stage that moved on, came on stage, complete with truss and all the lighting. But when it came on stage and then we went backstage, the entire thing revolved. So we could play backstage scenes and then it returned for the big finale at the end. So, this is the last example. It's a show that's still in development. It's in the development phase. So I thought you might find it interesting to see some of the process. How am I doing on time? Okay. This is a theater in Tokyo called 360 Stage Around. It's a fairly new building that puts the audience in the middle of the space, and the audience revolves within the space, and the scenery is all around the audience. and we're doing West Side Story. And everybody knows the show, of course, but this production is being presented in a completely different way. It poses many challenges, but offers many new possibilities. As a designer, I think it'll be a new way for the audience to experience the show. That's actually that's a plan that shows where the audience sits, and then the square around is showing you basically the available space I have for the scenery. And those little things sticking out, those are the way audiences enter into the space. They're like tunnels. So this was David's napkin drawing. To say, he's been thinking about it a lot, and he said, this is at least a starting point. So that's how we started. We decided where was the drugstore, where was the gym, where were these places going to be. That's kind of how you start with everything. So by having the audience in the center, this is me starting the model. This is how big the model is. This is a 1/4-inch model. So there's a hole in the center. So first I had to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to figure this out? So we built this model in 1/4-inch, and we left the hole where the audience would be open. So I have the model propped up on tables, and we have a little stool that we can crawl underneath, and we can stick our heads in the hole. These are some concept drawings, and this is as the model's starting to develop. So this is the process by which you end up seeing something eventually that you'll see on stage, but you don't get to see this part. So I thought you'd enjoy seeing this. So we were just like putting Post-its on and saying, okay, let's put Anita here, but then how do we get the audience over here if we've got Anita there? And so there's been a lot of juggling back and forth, and I've cut paper out, and I've ripped things out and moved them over to the other side, and we're still doing that right now. I think we're getting close to finishing the final version. Yeah, this is what it's like. These are just some close-ups of what we're starting to flesh out more. And David wants to expand the locations. We're going to have a scene in Central Park. This is the team. One last thing I thought I would just give you a little chat about. When you look at all the stuff that I have generated, that the designers generate, from seeing and hearing about what we do, the process, we generate a lot of sketches and models and prototypes. What happens to all that stuff, right? You ever ask yourself, what happens to all that stuff once the show goes up? Well, that's been something of an obsession of mine. I have a storage space filled with models, and I know many designers have closets full of sketches and drawings, and you don't want to part with this stuff, but you also, can't make your house a museum. So I created this website. It's a virtual store, and it's called Broadway Design Exchange. And it's where set designers, costume designers, prop designers, collectors, fans, theater lovers, they can purchase or sell their stuff. So this gives you a sense of what I have on the website. There's Robert Prinziola's sketch right there, which I am the proud owner of, I have to say. And what I did, because I wanted to promote this, there's a thing called Broadway Con. I don't know if you've heard of it, but if you're a big theater fan, you've heard about it. Now it was in its 4th year. It's a convention that they are doing in New York now, and theater fans from all over the country and other countries as well have been coming to New York and going to this event. And there are all kinds of programs scheduled and talks from Broadway people, and there are all these booths. And I thought, well, I'm going to do a booth for Broadway for my website. So I got a number of my colleagues to bring their stuff or let me borrow their stuff and put it up on this in this booth that we set up. And it has proved very, very successful, and I think it really appeals to a lot of people, because so many people who love theater don't know how to get this stuff. So, and I also want my things and all this hard labor to have a place where someone can appreciate it and have a home. So I've been taking apart some of my models and putting them in little boxes like this so that people can purchase them and hang them on their walls. And of course, people dress up at this thing too. Oh, you should see. It's really quite something. So, well, I'm almost finished. I just wanted to say a couple more things. That despite all the expanding outlets there are for entertainment, I think people still continue to yearn for live theater experiences. And scenic design continues to evolve, and designers will continue to incorporate technologies that expand that experience and enhance that experience. I hope that by showing you some of my work, it has given you a better glimpse of the backstage challenges for set designers. Next time you're watching a show, a play, or a musical, you might ask yourself the question, what decisions had to be made to create this world that you see? And where did all that scenery go? Ultimately, though, I think the true measure of good set design is when you watch a play or a musical and you're so transported by the story that you just couldn't imagine it being done any other way. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm happy to take questions if you like.
So we have a question back there.
Yes.
So when a play's in a theater, and you design the set, so where do you create all of it? Like a big warehouse, or how does that?
Well, how does it get built? For commercial theater, there are scene shops that exist, actually, especially in the New York area. There are about, I would say, 4 or 5 big ones that are like union shops with massive warehouse space, expert welders, carpenters, draftspeople. And my job, one of my jobs is to not only do the model, but also to generate a full set of drawings. Every single thing that needs to get built has to have a drawing. It's like architecture. So you do plans, elevations of everything, color elevations to show what you want things to be, what colors you want them to be painted. You spec materials if you want something to be Formica, or if you want it painted Formica, if you want, you have to do all of that. It's like architecture. And then there are great places that they build, and then they engineer the scenic elements so that they can be assembled and taken apart, because they might assemble them in the shop, but then they have to take everything apart, load it into a truck, drive it to the theater, and then unload it and put it back together. And the same goes for tours, by the way. Yes?
What shop did the drops for Edwin Drood?
It's a scene shop called Scenic Art, and it's beloved by many, many designers because it's one of the only ones that specializes in painted scenic art. That's their specialty. A lot of their artists work at the various shops around the city, painting, set pieces as well. But the drops are usually done at Scenic Art because that's what their space is for. It's north of New York, about 45 minutes, in Newburgh. It's an old warehouse, and Joe Forbes is the guy whose shop it is, and he's an institution, and we all love him dearly, and we never want him to die. We really don't. He's a wonderful man, and he's taught many, many people. He teaches classes, and all of the artists there are phenomenal artists. Yes, Joaquin.
How much does it cost for automation and appliance and everything?
A lot of money. Usually with automation, the scene shop that builds the scenery rents the automation to the producer. So the way that works is they're responsible for maintaining the machinery, They load it in, and they charge a weekly rental. So that's part of the expense of the show. And at the end of the show, when it closes, they get the automation back. So they basically charge a rental fee and a setup fee to build the scenic elements. But Cinderella, for example, was about $1 million to build. Yeah, not cheap.
Is there any part of the process that you kind of dread going through? Like, I know that you love what you do with stuff, so like, is there anything you're kind of like, oh,
Well, after the bids, when they bid the set, usually you do a whole bid presentation. You invite all the shops. You have a session in an office, and everybody gets a packet of the drawings. Everybody has pictures of the model, all the color stuff. You go through all the drawings. You explain everything. They ask questions. They take it all back, and then they confer, and they talk to their electricians and their carpenters, and they all give them numbers because they say, well, how many lights are built into the scenery and all that stuff. And then they come back with a bid, an itemized bid, and then the producers go, okay, we have to cut something because we can't afford. So that's my least favorite part. Yes.
Just curious, I saw that you have a lot of hand drafting still. How much of your own drafting do you do? Can you talk a little bit about how you work with assistants working for you?
Yes, well, that's a function of my age. I still hand draft. I'm a hand drafter. That's how I learned, and that's what I love. Hand drafting. I prefer it. I'm not a computer drafting person. So all my assistants. It's funny because when I first started, we all hand drafted. From Avenue Q, in the Heights, those were hand drafted. When we did after that, when we started doing other shows, we started incorporating Vectorworks, it's a program that designers, they were all learning as they were assisting me. And over time, they taught each other, and then they all kind of figured out how to do it. And now they all do Vectorworks, and some of them do CAD, and I was left behind because I still just do drafting by hand. So I just draft the thing by hand, and I hand it to them, and then they scan my hand drafting, and then they draft it in the program. But it's a tool that's very helpful because you can just email it all, and you can change it very easily. But I don't know if I'll ever learn, honestly. I keep saying I'm going to do it, but it's like having to start to write with your left hand all of a sudden. It's like that you can write better with your right hand. Why do you have to do this?
So one last question.
Yes.
Are you working kind of equally in the U.S. and internationally?
No, mostly here. I would say mostly here. Once in a while, this thing in Japan is really special. But there are American producers that are co-producing with the Tokyo Broadcasting Company. It's a co-production. Yes?
It was mentioned that you've also art directed some TV or film. What might we have seen?
I was the art director on Sex and the City. That was the last thing I did. Because I had a little off-Broadway show called Avenue Q that moved to Broadway, and I had to quit because it was my first Broadway show, and that's what I really wanted to do. I never looked back.
So join us in thanking Anna.
Thank you. That was fun.
We appreciate you being here and especially spending time with the guests earlier.
No, it helped a lot. Talking to everybody. You're not like these crazy people.
So I'd like to thank you all for coming and joining us and being part of the McNay family tonight. But I'd like to extend an invitation for you to come see more of the Tobin collection of theater arts in some upcoming shows. Right now we have America on Stage that I told you about earlier, featuring one of Anna's models. Painting the Stage will come after that. It'll be